Depression is that heavy blanket over a person's mind that makes them feel hopeless, sad, and uninterested in the little joys in life. It messes with emotions and thoughts, which would lead you to believe that depression is only about what's going on in your head. But is it? Hi, and welcome back to Savvy Psychologist. I'm Dr. Jade Wu, and every week I'll help you meet life's challenges with evidence-based research, a sympathetic ear, and, as always, zero judgment. One of the first patients I saw ever was this pleasant middle-aged man that came to therapy because his wife made him. When he came in, the first thing he declared was, "I'm not depressed. I'm not sad. I've got no reason to be sad, and I don't know why my wife thinks I'm depressed at all." At first, I took his word for it. He genuinely seemed to have no complaints about the state of his life, which was pretty different from other depressed people that I had known. But as the meeting progressed, I felt heavier and heavier. My body sunk into my chair, and my gut felt like it was filled with lead. Later, my supervisor even observed that the pace of our conversation has slowed to a crawl. There was something very real, very physical, and very depressing in the room. And I felt it with my body. Our society has made major progress bringing depression, this common and debilitating disease, to public awareness. We've all heard about how depression affects our thoughts and emotions. It makes people less optimistic, more focused on negative experiences, and less interested in things that they used to enjoy. What many still don't realize is that depression is also a physical illness. It's not all in your head, even though it's called a mental illness. It is, in fact, in your head and in your gut, under your skin, bound up in your body's temperature, and even etched in your eyeballs. What my patient didn't realize was that depression could show up in various forms, not the least of which was in the form of physical changes in his body. It turned out that he was lethargic all the time. He had trouble sleeping, he constantly ached and felt tense, and he was just generally groggy. And it showed. By the end of our first meeting, the physicality of his depression had contagiously shown up in my body too. And that's how I knew that his wife was right. He sure was depressed. Don't worry, he ended up doing very well in therapy. Over time, the light turned back on in his body and mind, and he said that it felt like the whole machinery of his body was creaking back into gear. I was reminded of him when brainstorming evidence-based facts about depression for this episode, and it inspired me to review the latest research on the physicality of depression. Today, I want to share with you some surprising things that I found out about how depression is linked to the body. Link number 1. Depression is influenced by the bacteria in your gut. When something makes you unhappy or worried, but you can only describe it as a gut feeling, it may be literally due to something wrong in your gut. It might not seem obvious at first, but your brain and gut are two of the closest collaborators in your complicated body. They're connected by the vagus nerve, which is actually two bundles of nerves that serve as the information highway between the brain and the gut. They pass information in both directions about hormones, brain chemicals, and the bacteria that play with our feelings. That's right, bacteria in our gut influence our mood. This relationship is pretty complicated, and scientists still don't fully understand it. We do know that bacteria, of which there are 100 trillion in each of our guts, influences serotonin, an important neurochemical that plays an undeniable role in mood. We also know that stress in the womb and in infancy, which is a major risk factor for later depression, causes changes to the gut microbiome. Animal studies have also shown that giving depressed rats certain probiotics actually improved their depressive behaviors. I'm so glad someone is doing that research because I feel so bad for these rats that are all depressed and forced to swim and forced to run mazes, so thank you for doing this depressed rat probiotic prevention study. A lot more research is needed in this area before we can provide specific tips on how you can improve your gut microbiome for better mental health. But I think it's safe to say that a nutritious, varied diet is probably a good place to start. For example, there is evidence that the Mediterranean diet is good for a healthy gut microbiome, which may in turn benefit overall well-being. This is great news. Mediterranean food is not only delicious, but it may also be one of the Greek secrets to happiness? Awesome. Okay, so now we know that the gut is involved in depression. What about other body systems? We just talked about the gut, but what about the skin? So link number 2. A body with depression has a weird relationship with temperature. You know how it's really nice to curl up under a blanket on the couch and have a hot cup of tea in the winter? It's the little things in life. This feels so pleasant because there are heat-sensitive sensors in our skin that communicate with the brain, specifically to some of the brain areas involved in mood. When you wrap your hands around that hot mug, these areas of your brain light up. The more they do so, the more pleasure you feel. But people with depression have a weird relationship with temperature. In general, they have a less active thermoregulation system. They have a higher core body temperature and are less able to sweat, which is a really important way that our bodies automatically regulate temperature. In the case of the hot mug in winter, those with depression have less of those brain responses to touching heat with their skin, so they're not as able to get those little shots of joy. Luckily, successful treatment of depression seems to restore the body's normal ability to thermoregulate. There is also some evidence that we can directly use heat to treat depression. A recent Journal of the American Academy Association, or JAMA, study gave depressed participants just one session of whole-body heat treatment using infrared heat. The study showed that even a whole week later, participants who received the heat treatment experienced less depressive symptoms than those who got a sham treatment without heat. So, if you struggle with depression, one inexpensive way to get yourself some relief may be to take a hot bath or do some hot yoga. But maybe not too hot, because it might actually hurt. Link number 3 between depression and the body is that depressed people feel more pain. When we say that depression is painful, we may be onto something more than metaphorical. There has long been evidence that people with depression actually feel more pain. At least, they have a lower threshold for pain, meaning that it takes less pressure, heat, or other types of discomfort to cause a level of pain that feels unbearable. For example, one recent study published in the Journal of Pain, which, what a journal title, tested the pain perceptions of over 700 people that were actively in the middle of a depressive episode, as well as about 450 never depressed control subjects. They induced pain through pressure to the index finger and found that the depressed individuals expressed pain at a lower pressure point than their non-depressed peers. Statistically, they were able to relate this to the depressed group's worse sleep and lower physical activity, both of which are common features of depression. It's difficult to say that getting better sleep, which is often not something you can control, or increasing your physical activity would help with pain perception. The study didn't directly test this, but I'm willing to bet that better sleep and exercise wouldn't, hurt. And that pun was entirely intended. Anyway, we've traveled through whole systems in the body like the gut and the thermoregulation and pain systems. What about a very specific corner of your eye? So link number 4, depressed people may literally not see as clearly. Depression is like a dark shadow that follows victims around, casting drabness over everything and making life look grayer and darker. It turns out that it may also literally make things look more blurry. One fascinating study by German scientists showed that, compared to non-depressed people, those with depression had less contrast sensitivity, The retinae in their eyes were less responsive to the contrast between light and dark blocks in a pattern. So they measure the pattern electroretinogram, PERG, an objective indicator of the eye's response, in 40 depressed people and 40 healthy controls. Not only did they find that the depressed group had less contrast sensitivity, but the severity of depression mattered too. The higher someone's depression score, the lower their contrast sensitivity. It's really hard to say why this would be, and even harder to say whether we can do anything about it. But let's just stay tuned together on the research, and also cut our depressed loved ones some slack if they don't seem to recognize you smiling at them from afar. So, the take-home message here is that depression is not just a mental phenomenon. It's very real and very physical. For people who know they're depressed, understanding these physical manifestations of the disease might help to find new ways of treating it, such as harnessing heat and diet to give the whole system a boost. For those who don't feel depressed per se, but maybe feel in their gut that something isn't right, it may be time to heed that gut feeling. It's possible that your general feeling of foggy, achy heaviness, that general blah, is not just due to the weather or midlife crisis. It could be depression making dents in your body. Let me know what else you would like to learn about depression and other psychological topics. Tell me on Facebook or Twitter. I'm at QDT Savvy Psych. And if you want more sleep-related tips specifically, I'm also at Jade Wu PhD. That's JADEWU PhD. Listen to the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up with each new episode. You can also sign up to get Savvy Psychologist delivered straight to your inbox. Savvy Psychologist is audio engineered by Steve Rickyberg and edited by Karen Hertzberg. As always, Savvy Psychologist is strictly for informational purposes and does not substitute for mental health care from a licensed professional. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you again next week for a happier, healthier mind.